We look at drills that improve our wrestling and grappling training.
This is the Kitsune clan, a group of sword enthusiasts who like cosplay, reenactment, and historical martial arts. If you have similar interests, feel welcomed.
We have already looked at different types of drills we can perform, especially with weapons, and we have argued that training drills is a good thing because then the whole training is much less static and therefore comes closer to a real situation, and it also conditions us to act in a permanent flow. When we now look at grappling or wrestling in general, we can of course use our common drills that we have and use these for entrances into grappling and wrestling. So this will clearly work out. But this mostly works for martial arts where you also have non-wrestling and non-grappling techniques. If you train martial arts that only focus on wrestling and grappling, these drills will not work for you. And that's a reason why a lot of that type of martial arts look so static and unesthetic and also are tricky to train in a steady motion. Therefore, we will discuss here some drills you can use for grappling and wrestling training. Drill number one that we can explore is a grip drill, which means we start out with gripping the opponent in a typical wrestling way, which means we take one hand into the neck of the opponent. The opponent will also grab our neck, and then we place the other hand onto the elbow of this arm that grabs our neck. This is a classical starting arrangement that we see, for example, in judo and jiu-jitsu type of wrestling, but also in other styles. Now, the advantage is on both sides similar, which means both sides can make the same types of draws and pushes and pulls, and there is no advantage on one side. One way to improve that is to try to sneak in the hand that is at the elbow also to the neck, because then I have two hands at the neck and I can draw on the neck. And for example, if you think on Muay Thai, I can then attack with the knees. Would not work for judo, but still it gives me more control if I have both hands in the neck. A typical reaction to this is that I then also try to sneak in my other hand in this position, and by this I negotiate the overall action. If we now combine this with a step forward, we will end up in a reversed position compared to our start position. We can swap this over and over and use this as a very simple start-up drill, and instead of doing our throws from a static standard position, we can train our throws from this type of drill, which gives us a minimal add-on, but it gives us more dynamic in our training. Even with total beginners, we can easily start out like that instead of being static, being more dynamic. This type of drill can also be used without the real throw, just the entrance of the throw, and therefore this is, for example, an option. If you have no mats available for a certain training, you can still use this type of drill for starting your training, for getting a bit the people into motion, and for example also you can use these for entrances into arm locks or headlocks. Therefore, this is not only an option for training throws in a dynamic way, but also some other wrestling and grappling techniques. As a next step, we can look at real throwing entrances, real throwing techniques, and how to make drills out of that. The next one can, for example, be easily used also for shows. One person will try to get into a hip throw. The other person simply pushes oneself from the hip of the opponent and by that jump in front of the opponent. If the hip throw comes really fast, this can be really tricky. And of course, if the hip throw is a harai goshi or something like that, so a hip sweep, it might be problematic. For most of the normal type of hip throws, so ogoshi, uki goshi, or koshi guruma, this is a nice exercise and you can simply always jump in front of the other person until somebody manages to get the throw, or even use for a counter attack, so for example performing taniotoshi or uranage or something similar. The next one is a bit more complicated and even more dynamic and can end in quite some throws during the drill. So we at first start out with one of the two partners trying to perform osotogari or better osoto otoshi. The other person moves around the hip, tries to evade the leg that has been attacked, turns around and then immediately attacks. And this will usually look like a uchimata or kanzeki otoshi depending on the exact execution. Basically the same type of throw but in the other direction. And then the other person is using more or less the same type of mechanics, evading with the hip, redrawing the leg, trying to go around. Change the direction, make an osoto gari slash otoshi again, but on the other side, and so on. This gives an interesting sequence depending how well you place your legs. It's very easy to keep it up. If you are a bit lazy in some of the steps, you might end up with reversing the roles, which is very unproblematic. And then finally, if somebody manages it, the person can, of course, throw the partner. As always with drills, we don't need to permanently stick to these drills. We can also use them as intermediate sequences in a bit more free fight situation or free play situation. The advantage is if you come into a situation where you would usually get stuck, you can simply resort to doing one of these drills. It's in general the basic idea to get with a continuum to free play by simply starting with such types of drills as we just have seen them, combining them then in a free way, allowing also one partner to perform a certain technique, then try to find a counter, go back into the drill or change the drill, and then more and more add free elements to the play. As we see here, this is not only possible for striking, kicking, and with weapons, it is possible with grappling. It depends on your possibilities, whether you have mats available, whether you are training with jackets or not. If you train, for example, in armor, you will have a lot of wrestling that looks different because then the possibilities to grip your opponent are different. If you train with strikes in the wrestling situation, then things also look a bit different. Then your elbows have to come in more and close the situation off. But in principle, these drills already give you some insights and some possibilities how to start off. And if you combine these few drills that you have here, then you can already come to quite some possibilities, almost reaching free play rather naturally. We will explore more of these types of drills in the future. We can then also combine these with some of the drills from striking or with weapons. We could, for example, start out with a weapon type drill, disarm, go into a boxing type drill, and from that enter wrestling type drills and even produce these further into groundwork drills and stuff like that. Training drills is good for repetitions, so you have the advantage that you can make many more repetitions than without a drill, and you get a better feel of how techniques function within the flow. So we can only suggest drills can offer you quite a lot, and as shown here, this is also available for grappling and wrestling. With this, although it's just a starting point, we hope we could inspire you and see you around next time.